And we're live. All right. Good evening, everyone. Can you guys hear me? Let me get a little something in the chat, some positive reinforcement, just to know we're all out there. Can you guys hear me? Before I go into this rant. All right, beautiful. Good evening, everyone. My name's Seidman. Yes, I'm running for mayor. And tonight, loud and clear, beautiful. Tonight, we are here to hear the address I need to hear from my next mayor. I don't know about you guys. I hope it resonates. This is the speech I need to hear from my next mayor. This conversation starts and ends with saying the words that the government is corrupt. If we can't start there, if we can't agree on that, it's going to be a very difficult uphill battle. Sisyphus is going to be pushing that rock up the mountain year in and year out. It's going to be backbreaking work just to move an inch because the full force of corruption is up against us. If we can't say those words, we can't begin the healing process. So tonight we say the words, the government is corrupt. Tonight we start the conversation about how to fix it. We come together and we show the world what democracy looks like. My name's Seidman. I'm running for mayor of New York because the government got corrupt. I don't know when, I don't know where, but the government got corrupt and we have to do something about it. So this is the speech I need to hear from my next mayor. The basic format is I will be going down my platform as outlined on my website. I'll put my website in the chat for anyone who magically at this point does not have it. Please follow along. There is no teleprompter. This is all coming from right here. Little outline from the website, but this is meant to encapsulate all the ideas that may not be clear from my website, right? We need to lay them out. We need to discuss them more. There's only so much I can put in black and white, right? The rest we need to have the discussion. So without further ado, let's jump into it. SeidmanForMayor.com. The number one issue is fixing our democracy. Our democracy doesn't work right now. The government's corrupt. To fix that issue, we need to get on the same page. And to me, that looks like actually making government respect the will of the people. Let's define corruption. When I go around New York and I go to different communities and I tell them the government's corrupt, the vast majority of people are with me right out of the gate. We don't even need to define that. It's almost a given. Some people challenge me on it, and to be thorough, I want to define what corruption is to me, and then I'd love to hear what corruption is to you guys. Corruption is a system that purports to do one thing and actually does another. For example, a government of, by, and for the people, but actually serves the special interest. Outsized representation for the 1%, influence that can be bought, districts that are gerrymandered, lobbying, revolving doors, bottomless corporate PAC donations. Do we think that corporations are making donations to politicians out of the goodness of their heart? They just feel like doing so. It's the right thing to do. Support our democracy. Corporations have a fiduciary responsibility to not waste any money. There's legal consequences if they waste money to their shareholders, right? Folks can go to jail if they misallocate enough funds in the corporate sector, right? So these donations are made with very specific interests, special interests, you might call. And it's a difficult issue to regulate because we're rubbing up against free speech. That's what Citizens United was about. It wasn't about destroying our democracy. It was saying, well, the second we start regulating free speech for corporations, are we going to regulate how much money individuals can spend at, on their own goods, in their own communities? Where does that end? It's such a slippery slope. And to me, I agree. I don't think we can regulate campaign finance our way out of this, right? We need to err on the side of freedom. We need to let corporations spend the money that they want. We need a different solution. That solution is too divisive. It could take years to fully resolve. So to me, the best way to deal with corruption is decentralizing power. And I rely on a thought experiment to prove my point. If you have 100 people and you give one of them all of the power, they have absolute power within this little democracy that we've created, or not so democratic democracy. You give one person all the power, there is 1 point of failure, right? If I can corrupt that one person, I'm good. If there are 100 people and we give them all equal power, you have to corrupt 51 of them now, or maybe 60 of them, or wherever we put the threshold for the majority ruling. That is the kind of system we need to build as a hedge against corruption. Corruption, we may never see the day where there is no corruption in government, but we can at least move in that direction. And that's what this campaign is about. I was just on a Zoom, believe it or not, with 3 elected officials who spent a full hour telling me about the beautiful federal stimulus New York State just got and how it saved our budget. It's going to put us back on track. It's everything we needed. And I asked them what guardrails were put in place to make sure the same money that we just got doesn't go back to the special interests, to the rich people who we were trying to raise taxes on anyway. If the government is corrupt, how can we trust them to spend this money? And that's why there's an order of operations to this. We can't fix climate change and make education better and fix zoning and infrastructure and all the issues that we're plagued with a corrupt government. Think about your kitchen, okay? The eggs fall on the floor. The milk is spoiled. It's all over the place. The cheese is rotten. Everything's on the floor. There's a huge mess, and you have to clean it up, but your mop is broken. You have to fix the mop first. And that's what decentralizing power and fixing the government is to me. Let's fix the mop, and then we can fix everything else. Nothing else is worth talking about if the government truly doesn't serve us. So to me, corruption, revolving doors, lobbying, endless corporate PAC donations, gerrymandering. Have you guys looked at your districts recently? They look crazy. My district is so long and has jagged ins and outs. That's corruption. Politicians are spending their time shaping our districts rather than serving us. So, I'd love to hear what corruption is to you. Whatever it is, hopefully we can agree it exists to some extent, some common ground, however you define it. Maybe you define it differently than me, but let's talk about corruption. Let's make sure that is a centerpiece of politics. We can't just keep pretending like it's not an issue. This is an intervention. This campaign is an intervention. We need to get the Democrats, the Republicans, the Libertarians, Green Party, everybody in the room. Let's be honest that our government is corrupt. Let's just say it. Of course, it's not ideal, but we got to say the words. The government's corrupt, and from there, we can fix it. But we have to say the words first. So, folks, SeidmanForMayor.com, democracy first. How do I envision a future with less corruption? It starts by decentralizing power, making sure those 51 people have control. Bring as many people into the fold. It's much harder to corrupt all 8.2, 8.3, 8.4 million of us than just the 51 city council people and the mayor. So to me, that looks like more referendums. To me, it looks like online voting. I think any one of us should be able to propose a law, and then we should all crowdsource if that's a good idea. We should be discussing it every night in different gymnasiums around New York. We should be coming out, discussing these ideas, bringing experts before us, talking to our neighbors. That is the solution, right? We all have a unique perspective on New York. I know that pothole on 110th Street that took out my tire last week, right? I can propose as a part of this response to repaving our city to focus in certain neighborhoods, right? My lived experience can offer something that these politicians, they could never see, right? We all have such a unique perspective. We all need to be brought into the fold. And right now we're in the fold. We get to vote every year, primary, general. Every now and again we get a referendum, right? They throw us a bone. Usually it's nonsense. It's like, should we increase the budget at the library by 2 or 3%? You know, we did get ranked choice voting a few years ago. That was big. And look, the people brought that, right? It wasn't the politicians that got us ranked choice voting. If you don't have faith in the people, I think it's really important to look at what we've already gotten, right? And the stuff that the popular agendas that have passed that maybe you don't think were good, maybe that was the leaders who divided us, who didn't present us with the facts, who didn't come out and speak enough and bring us together. Maybe that's the issue. It's not the people. So to me, decentralize the power. It looks like more referendums. Every one of us should be able to propose laws any time of day, crowdsource ideas. The most popular ones will go to paper ballot, and then we can all vote on those together, right? I call it Athena. Any registered New York City voter should be able to log in, propose an idea, and then we'll all have the discussion together, if that makes sense. Now, this isn't a pure direct democracy. I don't want to move too fast, and I don't want to break too many things. I just want to decentralize the power for one position, the mayor. Now, the reason I choose the mayor and not the public advocate or city council or any of the other elected officials I could run for is the mayor is a very good choke point for many of the local ordinances and especially the budget, right? If budgets are being passed that are unpopular, this is a great way to stop it. My one campaign promise is I will only sign what 60% of New Yorkers agree on. 60% is that threshold I think is reasonable for actually getting something done, but also makes sure that we're unified. We shouldn't be passing laws based off of a simple coin flip, right? 50.01%, that is not a law worth passing. That's just chance at that point. So to me, 60%, if it goes to, and we start in Athena, if it's popular, 100,000 votes, over 60% in approval, we send it to paper referendum on your June primary, your November general, whenever it passes on Athena, we'll bring it onto the paper ballot, and then we'll all vote together with a paper trail. So that's the system. 100,000 votes and 60% approval to get onto paper ballot. And then whenever that election happens, whenever that referendum takes place, if 60% of voters approve of this idea, I'll sign it. That's my campaign promise. And a campaign promise is a very slippery idea, right? Obama promised to close Guantanamo, right? Campaign promises are a dime a dozen. But this is my only campaign promise, and it is fully within my control. It's not something I'm relying on any other entity. Nobody can tell me how I use my own power as mayor, right? That's why we vote for mayors, to just, you know, use that power as hopefully will serve us. And I think this is the best way I can serve, by actually bringing as many people into the discussion. So many people feel disenfranchised. They don't even bother to vote because they know that money is just going to be squandered. They've seen it so many times. They've lost faith. This is what needs to be done to restore that faith. This is what needs to be done to actually fix our democracy. In my opinion, right? Maybe somebody else has a different solution on corruption. Maybe there's a better way, right? Maybe the data says do something else. Different experiments around the globe have proven that too many referendums are deleterious, right? And we should be using a different approach. The issue is not one other candidate mentions this. Not one. I have all their websites up. Well, there are 57 of us, right? So I don't have all of them. I have the 8 leading candidates. I went through their website, and they don't even address corruption. That's what makes me most sick, right? We all know the government's corrupt. We see it in our own ways, right? But we are the politicians that are claiming to be our leaders just do this dance. They avoid the question. If it's not convenient, they answer a different question. They pretend as if the government isn't corrupt. This is an intervention. We need to be honest with ourselves. The government's corrupt. It's not irredeemable. There's hope, right? But we have to do something. And we have to do something that makes sense, not something that just sounds good. So I welcome all of you to think, what is the best solution to corruption? Is it more referendums? Maybe it's something else. I want to hear from you. My campaign, my whole vision for government relies on you guys being involved, you guys being interested, you guys proposing your own ideas. So that's my idea, but we have to fix the corruption first. I beg you never to vote for another candidate who pretends like the government isn't corrupt. It's tough because so many of these candidates are beautiful people, right? And they really mean well and they want to help, but their ideas are not strong enough. And we don't have time to let some of these existential issues go on without redress. Climate change, social media growing to infinite bounds, leading to anxiety and depression and silos where we don't even know how to communicate with our neighbors anymore. The death of God, whatever it is for you, right? There are end game scenarios, and I don't like to dwell on them, but it's part of being honest. That there are issues that need to be addressed. The government is the only entity big enough to take on some of these issues, and we need it to be legitimate. We need it to be working. I'm going to take a sip of this water, just like Marco Rubio in that address. Hopefully it wasn't as awkward as him. Folks, democracy first. I don't usually like to do this, but you guys are special. So I am going to go through each of the candidates who I'm running against. I'm going to send you their website and show you why I'm so disappointed in them and why you really should not vote for them. I'm going to start with Eric Adams. Let me tell you why. Eric Adams is a phenomenal guy, okay? I would get a beer with him any day of the week. He's plant-based. He's handsome. He's been in politics. He's been a cop. He's black. I love this guy, right? I want to hang out with this guy all day, right? The issue is when you go to his website, he's only got 6 ideas that he's really showcasing in his vision. So, I mean, I suppose that's not objectively bad, but it seems a little slim. What's exciting is that government is one of them. It's actually the top one, as if the government's a problem and it needs to be fixed. Right up my alley. I'm going to click on that. If you click on it too, you're going to see a lot of nonsense. Very unfortunately so. He talks about inefficiency and inequality lead to injustice. New York has tremendous resources, but it often wastes them on programs that do not deliver the desired result or spends them in ways that do not help New Yorkers who need them most. I will make our city government more efficient, effective, and equal. Yes, that's what we need for a leader. How is he going to do it? Closing the budget gap without affecting public services. Instituting real-time governing, finding the waste. Folks, that was 100% nonsense. He didn't say anything there. He just put up some bullet points that sounded good, but they don't mean anything. I want to know how. Okay, that's how he's going to make the government more efficient. Then we go down to more effective, building one digital platform for New Yorkers to access all city services, bringing the city to the community by delivering services in storefronts and in person in lower income neighborhoods, creating a recovery score to track our progress with analytics. Folks, this is the #1 problem. The government creates laws. It creates the rules of the game. It's like making the game of chess. You can't make too many arbitrary rules because that just perpetuates and ripples throughout space and time and has unintended consequences. We have to make the laws as elegant as possible, and they have to be based in a natural part of human psychology or the Earth's ecology or something like supply and demand. We need to be calculating for these realities, not broad campaign promises that sound good. And here we go, a more equal city. These first 2 points actually sound great. Prioritizing minority and women-owned businesses for city contracts, I'm down. Eliminating the fees for starting a small business, beautiful. But then he hits us with some more nonsense. Instituting a warning system for violations that do not pose immediate danger and maximizing the use of city assets, particularly office buildings for affordable housing. Why are we telling the office buildings how to operate? Why are we stepping into that contract? Why don't we actually step away and give them the freedom to use their own land as they see fit? This whole idea that government should be coming in and fixing every single problem. The government cannot fix every single problem, especially when it's corrupt. And he didn't say the government was corrupt. So, look, Eric Adams is great. Don't get me wrong. Definitely want to get a beer with him. But he cannot be the next mayor. That's 4 years of corrupt government, 4 years of inaction, 4 years of slogans that sound good, but don't actually work. All right, folks. It is 9:21, and we're still on the first. I mean, democracy first. That's important. We got to hit that. We got to be clear up front. But that's my vision. That's the number one issue we need to solve. Then we can talk about everything else. But I beg you, when you're looking to vote, June 22nd, it's critical that we are picking people who will take on the corruption. And corruption has just ballooned to these massive levels where they just boggle the minds. All right? It's hard to even imagine how corrupt the unions and the cronyism, the Port Authority, the politicians taking donations, and the laws they're passing that we don't even know about. We don't have time to regulate all their decisions. But you see the outcomes, right? You see the streets in disarray. You see schools that are so inequitable. You see rents that are through the roof. Climate change not being addressed. Infrastructure. Take your pick, right? You see it in the outcomes. These politicians, say what you want about them, none of them are stupid. They're all smart, every single one of them. They know the effects of their decisions. That means they're somewhere between being cowards and being corrupt. And it's time that we vote them out. The litmus test for finding these politicians that need to go are the ones who don't talk about corruption. Everyone should be screaming it from the rooftops. If you're running for office, you need to be speaking out against corruption. On the level of Bernie Sanders, right? I may not agree with all his proposals, but at least he is addressing this issue and taking it on, speaking out against it, right? Anything short of that cannot be tolerated. There's too much on the line. Racial justice, how many more years can we just not do anything? After all those BLM marches, all we got was no-knock warrants and no chokeholds at the federal level telling police departments what to do. That is not what democracy looks like. That is not going to work. We need to be coming together as communities, giving us the power to do so. Referendums, direct democracy, the democracy that actually works. Let's start with that. Okay, folks, we talked democracy, we talked corruption. We got to keep saying it. The government's corrupt, the government's corrupt, the government's corrupt. If we stop saying it, we're going to get lazy, okay? I'm going to be saying it a lot tonight. Honestly, I don't think I've been saying it enough. The government is corrupt, folks. Let's talk about the earth. It's time. The earth is our home. Let's start treating it that way. Folks, if you're just joining the stream, I'm on my website, seidmanformayor.com. You can check it out below. Second issue, the earth. It seems so overwhelming, so hopeless that we're going to be able to turn this ship around and actually, get out of these projections. We're already in sea level rise, right? We see it in Florida. We see it in Miami. Sunny day flooding. Temperatures are going up. CO2 levels are going up. The science is not unequivocal, right? There's still some uncertainty. We can't say climate change is scientific law, right? There's a difference between scientific law and scientific theory, right? It's a theory. It's a very well accepted one in the climate science community. There's still going to be people who dispute it, and we still need to be researching it. I will concede that there are issues with the way that this research is funded, right? It's very polarizing. It's very political. You have private industry releasing studies that differ from how the government is funding academic studies, and it's done in a very corrupt way. It's because the government's corrupt, right? You have government funds being spent, you can bet they'll be spent corruptly. So we need to be coming together and having this discussion as neighbors, looking at the data, looking at the facts. Can you guys hear that? Close my window. We can't take it as fact, but we know this needs to be addressed, right? We need to be cautious no matter what. Even if you don't accept climate science, I implore you to at least entertain the possibility that it could be cataclysmic and come together to have this discussion, right? There's a lot of data out there, NASA, intergovernmental panel, climate change, a lot of research has been done. This is overwhelming at this point. We need to be talking about it, but we need a government that is not corrupt to actually do something about it. Now, here's the second candidate I want to talk about. By the way, I don't like promoting my competition, but I plan on ripping into all of these candidates so hard that whatever, publicity they're going to get from me talking about them, you're going to more than lose. So the next candidate we're going to be checking out is the very charismatic Scott Stringer. He's got a climate action page, and I invite you to scroll through it. There are 35 bullet points here on all his different ways to fix climate change. You can read as many as you want. What I know is that laws are meant to be simple if they're going to work, right? The reason we're passing a law is because there's some ecological reality we need to correct for. To me, that's carbon emissions, right? If carbon emissions run away, the projections say sea level will rise, storms will get stronger, droughts and floods will be harshened, infrastructure won't be as able to keep up with the new changing, floodplains, and all the effects of that are unprecedented and unpredictable, right? Effects on biodiversity, climate refugees. It just goes on and on, right? The projections. So what we need to do is pass a law that will fix all of that. Let's go down to the root. We don't need to pass 35 laws. First of all, the government can't pass 35 laws. The government can't even pass one decent law, right? Because the government's corrupt. Scott Stringer forgot that the government's corrupt. He's been in government for 20 years, but he hasn't noticed, or he's been complicit, right? There's nothing on this website about fixing the government because he is the government. He's an establishment politician. He doesn't speak out against corruption. He wants to pass 35 laws to make us feel like, oh, we did something good for climate change, but none of them will work. He's not proposing a carbon tax. I'm proposing a carbon tax, actually. That's the only solution we need. Whatever pollution we see, whether it's air, water, e-waste, whatever it costs, if you want to make a mess, that is your business. This is a free country. All you have to do is pay for the cleanup, and you pay at purchase, okay? So that's what the carbon tax is. It says if you want to drive a gas car, mazel tov, that's your business, but you have to pay as soon as you fill up your tank for all the cleanup that the government is going to take care of. Right now, the government's corrupt. So do we want the government managing all these taxes? Unfortunately, that is the entity big enough to deal with this, right? If you guys think there's a corporation that can implement a climate tax, a carbon tax, that people would actually pay, I'd be open to hearing your thoughts. But this sort of needs to be levied. This is one of those things that just needs to be taken because it has to be done. Otherwise, tragedy of the commons runs away, right? So carbon tax is the only thing we need to do. To disincentivize all that behavior that we don't want to see, and then fund the cleanup. The carbon tax isn't just designed to be some liberal agenda to, have our will and make the conservatives cry. It's there so that we can clean up the mess. Every cent that goes to the carbon tax should go directly towards cleanup, whether that's subsidizing city parks, green spaces, or whatever the innovative technology of the future is to sequester carbon. That's where the money should be going because we're not doing that right now. We don't have the money to actually bring that about. Let's use economics to see the results that we want to see. Carbon tax, that's it. It's just one bullet point. Scott Stringer's got 35. I would not recommend that. Maybe if his first bullet point, maybe if the first 34 bullet points were the government is corrupt and this is what we're going to do about it, and then the last one was the carbon tax, I could maybe consider him. But that's not what he's proposing. So, folks, 9:30 in the East. We talked corruption. The government's corrupt. We say the words, we're having an intervention, we're coming together as a family, and we're going to figure this out together. That's the only group of people, us, who can fix this. We can't send some representative to go save the world for us. Not going to be Cuomo, certainly not going to be Bill de Blasio. How many heroes do we have to see rise and fall, right? When you give someone that much power, it turns their mind to mush every single time. It's so easy to predict. So why don't we just stop doing that? And let's elect a leader whose job it is to just organize us. They don't have that authority. They're just there to bring us together, facilitate the discussions, empower the voices that have the best ideas, and push them to the top. They can still throw out the first pitch at Yankee Stadium and, eat their pizza the wrong way. That's fine. But what they don't need is all that power. Politics does not have to be giving a few people a lot of power. Better strategy than just bury it real deep. We're talking about nuclear, folks. I'll plan for housing. We're going to get to that. No worries. Beautiful. Okay, folks, the earth. The government's corrupt. We're going to implement referendums, online voting, direct democracy as a hedge. It's not a full direct democracy, right? If we had full direct democracy, I heard this analogy yesterday. Full direct democracy is two wolves and a sheep deciding what is for dinner. Okay? That is just as bad as tyranny of the minority, right? Tyranny of the masses is not preferred to tyranny of the minority. There's some middle ground on that continuum, though, where there is no tyranny. And that's a theoretical balancing point that we may never achieve, but we can take the step towards that because we know we have tyranny of the minority. The 1% can buy as much influence as they need. It's not everyone in the 1%, but people in the 1% can use their money to get the outcomes that they want. What platform will we use to vote? Athena. It's going to be like Reddit, but it's going to look nicer and it's going to be secure, right? Proposals will have to be unanimous. But we should have that discussion about if you're just supporting somebody else's proposal, can you vote unanonymously? It's got to be an online voting system to crowdsource the ideas, right? And from there, it goes to the paper referendum. Okay, the government's corrupt. We're going to decentralize the power. Carbon tax to fix the earth. And we talked about Scott Stringer. As charismatic as he is, I don't think he is the man for the job. Police reform. This, I was repeatedly told to bump up on my website because the ideas were just outstanding. So here's the deal about money. Captain Maggie taught me this at the Stevens Police Department. I'm going to bleep out the explicits. But money talks and BS walks. Right? So if you want to get something done, you have to put the money where your mouth is. You have to align the incentives, pay for the outcomes that you want to see. One of the biggest issues with the police right now is that they're coming in from Jersey, they're coming in from Long Island, Connecticut. They don't live even in the city, much less the communities that they serve. So they sort of just view it as a gig. Like they're just coming in, they're going to do their shift, they're going to leave. They may not actually even really care about these communities. And that's possibly the number one problem with the police right now. This disconnect where not only is there no trust between either side, the communities or the cops, but they're not even integrated in any way. So the number one way to fix this problem is to pay them more to live where they serve. I'm proposing a 5 to 10% increase for any police officer who works where they live where they work, right? Let's pay for the outcomes that we want to see. It's not rocket science. It just requires a government that isn't corrupt. There's an issue with hiring police officers where the union protects the background, so we often don't even know who we're hiring. They may have worked for 20 years and we don't have the full records. Those need to be fully transparent. I don't really think there is such a thing as government property or government secrets. The government is the people, right? You are there to lead us, but not do what you want behind closed doors without publishing those documents, right? So we need to work with the union to make that hiring process more transparent. And to me, that's not possible with a corrupt government. So unions buy just as much influence as corporations. They're not objectively wrong, right? Neither are corporations. Some of you on this call might think so, but they each have a time and a place, right? They each have a function to serve. And there was a time when teachers were treated like garbage and disposable. They were totally taken advantage of. And these are possibly our most valuable civil servants, right? It's tough to rank them, but they're all so critical. Teachers are the future, okay? So the union needs to protect them, but we can no longer protect bad teachers at the expense of students. That is not acceptable. We have crossed the line of where it balances into an area where students are suffering year in and year out, and the government doesn't have enough teeth to actually fix the problem because the union has too much influence. So same thing with police. We need to stand up to the union. If it requires paying all officers more, if we need to negotiate, that's fine. Look, if you want a good plumber, you got to pay for it. You can't just go on Craigslist and get some cheap plumber to fix your pipes. It's not going to work out, right? You want a good pianist, you want a good baker, you want a good anyone, you got to pay them, right? So let's pay them if we need to, but that should come with the return of bad officers will no longer be hired, right? We're going to make a change in the hiring process that will actually work. And I could never, maybe if I was a police captain for 30 years or a chief or whatever, I would have that insight. But no politician could ever really have all that information on exactly what that looks like, right? And that's why we need to crowdsource these ideas. Maybe someone on this call has it, right? Maybe one of you has it right now. That's why we need to open the floodgates, bring in all these ideas, crowdsource the best ideas, discuss them, make sure the government isn't corrupt, so that we can actually stand up to the union and find the middle ground between where cops are well represented and the public is safe. The government's corrupt. Finally, never disconnecting from another 911 call without offering a social worker. They do it in other cities. They've done this in Eugene, Oregon, of all places, for 30 years. The chief of police there calls this program indispensable. It's called Cahoots. Beautiful program. They save millions of dollars by sending one social worker instead of 6 cops to repeatedly shuffle around folks with mental illness. They need help, right? They don't need police attention. We send police to clean up every single mess that we didn't clean up before, right? Police are critical for very specific instances. Many of these instances, they are not required, nor are they trained to act in that instance. So there's a lot of work to be done with the police. I think these 3 ideas will really set us aright. It's going to require the government not being corrupt. What will you do to address the issue of the breakdown of the family structure? Ooh, schools themselves mean nothing if the kids don't show up. Yeah, we're going to get to this. But unfortunately, as sad as it is to say, the government cannot solve every single issue. All the government can do is remove the issues that it self-imposes, right? The government has passed so many laws that break down our family structure, welfare most notably. Welfare provides a financial incentive to get divorced, which is the #1 way to rip families apart. The Black family single parent numbers have quadrupled since welfare was first passed. Welfare is extremely racist, and it's laws like that, if we get out of the way, the family structure can actually come back strong. It requires the government not being corrupt. Folks, the government's corrupt. This is what democracy looks like. Decentralize the power, carbon tax, police reform. let's talk racial justice. This is the fourth point on my website, SeidmanForMinute.com. My name's Ira Seidman. I'm running for mayor because the government got corrupt. None of the other candidates seem to have noticed, or they're just highly complicit, or some combination of the two. We're going to fix it together. Racial justice. Never letting anyone get treated as less than ever again. So we have laws that still favor certain groups, right? They may not do that explicitly, but they have unintended consequences, welfare most notably. I have another example here. Stop and frisk disproportionately hurt Black people for nonsense laws, right? Having marijuana, which, you know, is a right that was taken from us. We shouldn't be going to jail because our rights were taken from us, right? This country was built on freedom. So we can't be using the police to enforce these bad laws and calling that racial justice. Okay, so it starts with fixing the bad laws that disproportionately hurt one group or the other. If those laws are indispensable, if we can't get rid of those laws because they actually address some root of nature, like the carbon tax or something like that, we have to find another solution to prop up that community, right? That might be disproportionately affected. But these laws that target one group over another, they need to be discussed and they need to be fixed, all right? It requires a government that's not corrupt, and it requires all of us coming together to have that discussion. I think part of the best way to create that floor that we all want, right? If you don't want a floor on which you don't let your neighbor fall below, you might as well just move back to nature, right? That's what nature is. We have society so that we don't, you know, have just bloodbaths and brutality, right? We have some decency, coexistence, community, right? So the floor is what protects all of us. And the floor is very broken right now. The floor actually is more like a ceiling to a lot of people. So to me, universal basic income is the best way to provide a floor, right? I don't trust the corrupt government to spend all this money on services that are designed to help us. I think people, to a large extent, know how to spend their own money best, right? And welfare incentivizes people to stay in poverty. It makes it very difficult to rise up. You have to almost jump from making $0 to $60K a year to make sense to get off of welfare, which is very difficult to do for anyone, right? Much less if your family has been in poverty. So universal basic income is the best way. If we move from welfare towards basic income, we can actually provide a floor on which we don't let anyone slip below. And I think that's the best way to quantify it. It's the most elegant way to do it. The amount we're going to have to discuss sort of depends on how our budget is looking. And I think it should be incremental. So I would start with $25 a month. It's low, but it's an experiment worth doing. And from there we can see. But love to hear your guys' thoughts. Looks lively in the chat. In addition to the basic income, coverage for medical expenses and preventative care. Preventative care is one of these things that, yeah, it's ideal if we can just distribute money as basic income, but certain investments are just so, the ROI is so large, like getting checkups. Catching cancer at stage 1 instead of stage 4 is so much better for everyone, right? That we as a society should be making that investment, and we all come out ahead when our life expectancy grows, when we're all healthier, our health span grows. Those are the investments the government needs to be making, because there's no business that could really make that investment. There's no way to make money off of someone not going to the hospital, right? It's just an expense that the government needs to eat because we all know it's best. So that's part of the floor. And guaranteed affordable housing. So most of that can just be solved, and we're going to talk about this. I think there was a housing question before. Most of that can be solved by just making the market freer, right? Let's get out of the way of construction. Let's incentivize it if we need to in the short term, right? Let's cut real estate taxes. Let's make the changes in our government and our incentive structure that we need to bring about the development and the supply that's going to fix a lot of this problem. It's possible that when that's all said and done, there's still people who can't afford a home. And for them, we have to discuss the solutions. For me, I think there is a place for guaranteed housing. but we have to draw the line, right? We have to define why we're doing that and for whom. And for me, I think if there's a history of mental illness, that's grounds for having your own home. It's cheaper to give these people homes. It's more humane. It's better than sending them to jail for an illness that they have no control over, right? That's to me what a decent society is, but we have to define the line. Maybe you think the line should be somewhere else. Let's define the line. We can't just give everyone a home and give them healthcare and you don't have to work. You know, like where does that lead? Does everyone just move to New York and get this free stuff? How many millions of people have to move to New York? How many millions of people have to stop working before we realize that that is not a sustainable model? So we have to define the line. For me, it's mental illness. I think the free market could bring down prices for all of us. Right now, the rent has the boot on our throat, and it forces us down this rat race where we have to work to pay the rent and work to pay the rent, and it sort of puts us in this loop where we can't actually fix our society because we're so busy just paying the rent, right? We're the second most rent-burned city in the union, only behind San Francisco. It's time that we fix that. It's going to require loosening zoning laws for sure, and maybe even providing more incentives through cutting real estate taxes. So, but to me, that's what the floor looks like. That's what racial justice looks like. Raising the floor and actually making the floor work, right? Our safety net is so broken that it's almost not worth having, as it acts like a ceiling for so many communities. Implementing police education, criminal justice reform. Just talked about that. And then initiatives like stop and frisk were so obviously racist. Same with spot checking tickets on the select bus service. It totally disproportionately hurts Black communities. It's a practice we know has disproportionate outcomes, and we need to stop. We need to restructure the way those buses work. Maybe we could just send more buses, right? And then we don't need to spot check these tickets. Everyone can just swipe their MetroCard. Right now they send the bus so infrequently that it would take forever for everyone to swipe their MetroCards. Maybe the solution is just send more buses, right? That's the kind of thinking we need to fix the floor, to make sure our society stops disproportionately hurting certain communities. And it all starts with a government that isn't corrupt. How do we help those without an opportunity if we scrap welfare? Universal basic income. That's one way to do it. We're not scrapping anything. We're pivoting towards something with fewer perverse incentives. Folks, the government's corrupt. We have to do something about it. Let's decentralize the power. Jobs. Everybody wants a job, right? Everyone needs a job. Not everyone, but most of us. How are we gonna promote jobs? How are we gonna promote the economy, right? The government should very loosely be involved with the economy, right? That's the whole point of the market. It's free, and democracy is sort of like a counterbalance to the inequality you might see in the market, right? Democracy can sort of be the yin to the yang, but they should be very loosely connected, right? Only in critical circumstances should we intervene. You know, most of these stimuluses we wouldn't need if the government wasn't originally causing these issues, right? The government's corrupt. They're spending this money inefficiently and ineffectively. It's going to their friends and their donors, the special interests. If we stopped all that up front, we fixed it upstream, we wouldn't have to clean up all these messes, right? So it starts with making sure the government isn't corrupt. That includes the contracting process. Has anyone ever read a government contract? They're insane. They're hundreds of pages long. They're extremely confusing. Nobody knows where the money's going or how this is being done. It's being done in back rooms by corrupt politicians who don't even say the government's corrupt as they run for re-election. This whole process needs to be streamlined. We need to get rid of all of the laws and regulations that aren't serving us. And only a few people in the city could really comment on that, right? We're just so deep down that rabbit hole. Scott Stringer is probably one of those people, right? He's the controller of the city. He has a very inside view on what's going on. He's not speaking out against it. We need to be streamlining that process. The budget should be a document that anyone can read, right? We should all be able to look at the budget and understand how this money is being allocated, know who to contact if we have concerns. That is not what's going on right now. We need a drastic change, okay? So the fewer corrupt contracts we're signing, the more contracts we could sign, and the more we could build. Right now, we spend $1.2 billion per mile for our subways. $1.2 billion per mile. That's 2 to 6 times what the other cities of the world spend. So how do we get to this point? Part of it is the unions, part of it is the corrupt politicians. We need to actually fix all that red tape that is holding us back. We're fighting with one hand tied behind our back. It's time to fix that, right? That'll create more jobs. If you want a job, maybe the government should be less corrupt, be signing fewer corrupt contracts, and then more jobs could actually be created. Instead of having 12 people work on this tunnel extension, maybe we only need 3, and the other 9 can still work. They can still have a job. They'll just actually be doing something productive. So finding that middle ground between protecting the workers and making sure that the city's not getting ripped off, right? Because we all suffer when we have to wait 19 minutes for the 5 train. Cut down on city bureaucracy, decentralize these budgets. Yeah, the budgets are being spent in these big offices in Midtown. They're being allocated in these sweeping ways that aren't working, right? If we just gave more people more flexibility to, principals, more control over the budget. Individual precincts, opportunities to be creative and implement the funds the way they see fit, and then they can all learn from each other. That's sort of the way the US was designed, right? For the states to interact and figure out what the best model is, and we can all learn from each other, right? When we're doing it in this centralized way that's so ripe for corruption, it's not a good model. Some things make sense. The federal government should be in charge of the military because we don't need 50 militaries, okay? But a lot of this budget, we have an enormous education budget in the city, and it is not going to the students. It's not going to the teachers. So we need to decentralize that budget to give more options to more people to get creative with how to spend this money, and we can all learn from each other. Finally, oh my goodness, we've been sold this bill of goods, this nonsense, where if you're having budget problems, you only have 2 options: raise taxes or cut spending. That's what we've been told, right? Since day one, those are our options. What about reviewing the spending we already have and making sure it's working, right? Why aren't we reviewing these expenditures? Because it's obviously not working. It's not serving us. We don't have to raise taxes. I actually don't think we should be raising any taxes until the government is less corrupt, right? I think inequality is bad, but arbitrarily just raising taxes to punish rich people when that money won't actually go towards serving communities that need it. We already know that. We've seen where the spending is going. It's not working. The outcomes are so clear. So we have to be reviewing. There needs to be more transparency. The New York City budget is dozens of documents, hundreds of pages long, incomprehensible to almost anyone except Scott Stringer, who probably wrote the budget himself and knows exactly where the money's going. So that's the best way to create jobs. The government needs to get out of the way, let the free market do its thing, prop up those jobs that the free market isn't really filling, right? As free as the food industry is, there's still 40 million Americans in hunger. So the government needs to step in, but it doesn't mean over-regulate everyone just so that those 40 million aren't served any differently than anyone else. It means stepping in as needed, and maybe it just means a universal basic income. And everything else that we've been doing to try to fix this inequality can sort of fade away. But that's a discussion that only 60% of us could really, I would only trust the majority, 60% of New Yorkers to decide that. I wouldn't trust any one politician to make that decision on all of our behalf. Gotta walk and chew gum. All right, folks. If you don't know, now you know. The government's corrupt. We have to fix that first. Nothing else is worth addressing until we fix that. Any politician that tells you otherwise, you gotta be circumspect. You gotta be. There's no other way. Once we agree the government's corrupt, we can start to fix it. To me, that looks like decentralizing the power, more referendums, make the government respect us institutionally, and make a systemic change in the government so that they respect us. And from there, we can actually start talking about all these other issues. We should be the fourth branch of government, the people, right? The president is almost meant to be like that popular decision, even though like the president isn't really elected popularly, but be that as it may, it's obviously not working though. So either the president can decentralize their power, or a mayor could voluntarily decentralize their power, and that would be one way to do it. Or we would need an institutional fix in our constitution and the way that our city is run, our state is run, and that's so unlikely to happen. I think this is the most elegant solution to actually fixing the government, is somebody getting into that position and then promising to decentralize that power. If there was an easier way to do it, I'd be doing it. Healthcare reform. I like this. Sound minds and sound bodies call for a sound healthcare system. Can't argue with that. Mental health has gone unfunded for 50 years. It is cruel and unusual what we do to our mentally ill neighbors. How we leave them out in the cold in the middle of a pandemic, homeless, and then we lock them up in prison. That's our solution when they inevitably end up on hard times, right? And commit crimes. Like, that's predictable. To what extent are we responsible for those crimes? Because we knew it would happen and we did nothing. So the government needs to be there to support that floor. And that's sort of like an additional sort of support that I think makes sense because it comes from a natural phenomenon, right? Any one of us could deal with mental illness. It's not a choice. It's not preventable in most cases. So the government needs to be there to provide that extra support. And that's why housing maybe should be free for mentally ill folks. There are cities that are experimenting with this and how it's cheaper to give homeless people housing than to deal with the downstream effects of crime, locking them up, all the personal damage to their own families from having undiagnosed illnesses. So that's what makes sense to me. But we definitely need more mental health in this city. It should be a right is a very hot topic, but it needs to be something that is offered, that is paid for, that is there for the people who need it, right? To just leave mentally ill people to go through this world as if like it's the same as anyone else. It's obviously not true. It's obviously not working. It's time to make a change. So that's the number one part of healthcare reform. It's gone unfunded for too long. And how exactly that takes shape, I'd love to have the discussion, but it's a huge priority of mine. Getting insurance people out of the middle of emergency departments. Why is it that we don't ask for your insurance when the cops show up or when the fire department shows up, but we ask for it when the medics show up, right? And we want to send your insurance some big $22,000 bill for your one night stay. That doesn't make any sense. If this is truly a right that you can go to the emergency room and that the city will take care of it, we shouldn't be pandering to insurance companies. That's ripe for corruption. They're in bed with each other. It's so obvious from the $22,000 you have to pay for one night in the hospital. They just hooked you up to an IV. The government's corrupt. If we want to fix that, we're going to have to fix the government first. But there's no reason we should be looking for insurance to subsidize our medical care, right? For that emergency care. How is it any different from police and fire? And finally, preventative care for all. I think I addressed this earlier. But we all come out ahead when we catch cancer at stage 1. It's just an investment that the government needs to bite the bullet for, but we'll all reap down the road, right? And nobody's going to force you to go to, we could do it in the form of vouchers. We could do it in the form of more primary care doctors and urgent care. We could talk about exactly what form that would take, what's the most effective way to do it, but it's an investment that needs to be made. If the government is going to do anything, this is the sort of safety net it needs to set. Instead of universal health care, how about government subsidized health care? Like vouchers? As in private companies try to provide the best services at the lowest price. Yep, I'm open to it. It doesn't have to be an either or. You can give people the choice and let the money go where the people decide. You know, if people want to take the public option, that's great. If people want to take a voucher, that works too. We should experiment. We should decentralize the model. Maybe different boroughs do it different ways. It's funny, New York is about the size of Switzerland, right? So Switzerland is not going to have the same zoning laws for the whole country. They're not going to have the same education laws for the entire country. New York is such a big city that maybe we should stop treating it like a city and just keep decentralizing until these models start to work in the communities where they're being implemented. Folks, it's the top of the hour, a little bit afterwards. Thanks for sticking with me. This is outstanding. Let's recap up to now. The government's corrupt. We got to decentralize the power. Family intervention, get everyone in the room, get on the same page. And from there, we can fix all these other problems. Racial justice, the police, implementing a carbon tax, preventative care for all. It's only possible with a government that truly respects the will of the people and wants to serve the people. Criminal justice reform. If you don't know, now you know. Ira Seidman. I'm running for mayor of New York. We're on my website. I'll put it back in the chat for anyone just joining us. You know what? Let's take a quick detour over to Andrew Yang's website. This is very interesting because I believe we were just talking about universal basic income a few levels up. And Andrew Yang in 2020 was a hero. He got up and he fought for this idea that was wildly unpopular. He made it mainstream. It's not quite like a pillar of the liberal agenda now, but he made single-handedly, he pushed that ball so far downfield. We have a lot to be thankful to him for, a lot to be grateful. The issue is 2020 Andrew Yang is not running. 2021 Andrew Yang is running, and he is very disappointing. So I just sent out his website. If you want to click on it, that link, we're on the basic income for New York City. So you would think that he's proposing a basic income for New York City. Instead, it says a Yang administration will launch the largest basic income program in the country. Through this program, 500,000 New Yorkers with the greatest need will receive a basic income that will help give them a path forward. No matter how many times you say basic income, if it's only for the bottom 500,000 New Yorkers, it is not basic income. That is a lie. And he's using his momentum on this idea he used to run on. He's trusting us not to look at his website and understand what he's saying. That is not basic income. That is an expansion of welfare. It's a disaster. And it's a lie what he's doing, running on that momentum from the past, baiting and switching us like that. Classic political move. Classic. Second only to the dodging the question, right? I'm not going to answer that. Very disappointing. Extremely disappointing. It's not what New York needs right now. It's certainly not how you make the government less corrupt. Had to get that off my chest. Sorry about that. Folks, we're talking criminal justice reform. Here's the issue with criminal justice. You have the prisons. Oh, yeah, there's a question for me. Won't a universal basic income cause inflation? Yes, it will. But inflation is not objectively wrong, right? It's when you have runaway inflation. It's where you're printing to infinity and the value of the dollar becomes worthless, especially if that money is going in a very corrupt direction, right? So if the money is not going to the people, it's going to the special interests, and we're deflating everyone's assets all the while, that's a disaster, right? But inflation is a pretty natural part of any economy at a steady rate, right? I know the crypto people are disappointed with the way money is being printed. I've noticed in my own life a pretty marginal inflation rate. You know, their argument is that assets are appreciating at a greater rate, or they would call it inflating. I would call it appreciating. I think it's just the shortage of housing. It's a naturally short supply. The issue is not with the currency there. The issue is with the laws, the corrupt government. I think it depends on how much we're printing, right, to cause universal basic income. So to me, it's just about pivoting in a way that makes the laws less perverse. Right now we have welfare, right? So long as we're beating welfare in a more fair and equitable distribution of wealth and money in a way that doesn't keep people down, I think that's what we have to beat, right? We already have inflation. If inflation's your major concern, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It's not my number one concern, inflation. I don't really see the data saying we're printing to infinity. We're still the gold standard currency in the world, right? Everyone else is printing. It's just what's going on right now. What I wouldn't recommend is just sitting on your money in cash. That's probably not wise right now. But so long as you're investing, and the government isn't too corrupt so that you can't get a job and that there are all these artificial restrictions on what you can do with your wealth, I think, we'll be okay. What about crypto? No comment. I mean, crypto's great. Just let them do their thing. I think it's totally, the whole point of crypto is it's separate from the government. So I don't mind it. If you have Bitcoin, congratulations. Keep up the good work. Criminal justice reform, folks. To recap, it's 10:07, so I'm gonna pick up the pace here a little bit. Definitely gonna keep my eye on the chat, and we definitely have to roast some of the other politicians. So we got a lot to do, but it all starts with decentralizing power, saying the government's corrupt. I'm proposing Athena, online voting, more participation as a hedge against corruption. Nobody else is even talking about corruption, right? Not a good look. We're down on criminal justice reform. Right now, the Department of Corrections is in charge of rehabilitating convicts, right? It's their job to get them back on their feet. That is like the bagel shop getting you off of carbs. It's like, oh yeah, enjoy these bagels, but then you're going to have to wean off of gluten like here, and then you should shift towards more nutrients here, and that they're giving you a whole plan to get off of carbs. That's just not in their nature. It's too perverse to expect prisons to rehabilitate their own source of income so that they don't come back. We need to divorce those institutions. So what I would do is make the Department of Corrections the Department of Incarceration, because that's what they do. They don't correct anything. They just punish. Okay? And then we should actually create a Department of Corrections that has incentives aligned to lower recidivism, help people who are in prison land a job, get skills while they're in prison. There need to be two separate entities. They can't be the same entity. Roast. The second thing we're going to do, and this was actually inspired by a candidate I used to know, Andrew Yang in 2020. He had a great idea. He was going to pardon every single marijuana user and give them a high five on their way out. And I respected that. I thought that was a brilliant idea. So I have my own version of that. Under criminal justice reform, we are going to live stream the controlled demolition of Rikers. We're going to take it down for the world to see that this is no longer acceptable. This is not how we incarcerate. This is not how we treat people. And this is not how we rehabilitate. We're going to take it down, and we're going to turn it into something beautiful, right? The park of the 21st century. Wherever the 21st century Frederick Law Olmsted is, they're coming to New York, and they're gonna use that space. That is no longer for incarceration. The history is too dark and brutal, corrupt, and disgusting. We're gonna stand up to that, and we're gonna rebuild our prisons for restorative justice. And if you don't know what that is, there needs to be punishment, right? If you break the law, you have to be punished. But punishment should take the form of giving everyone justice. And oftentimes, people who are criminals were victims themselves at one point. So our laws need to start accommodating that and making sure not only that those people can sort of make amends and when they re-enter society, they are prepared, but also so that future generations, if we're going to take parents from their kids, there needs to be some sort of infrastructure in place to make sure those kids aren't traumatized the way their parents were, to stop these cycles at some point. All starts with controlled demolition of records. It's so hideous. And drug use, locking up anyone for drug use is nonsense. Any local ordinances we have to get rid of. If we can't put stuff in our own bodies, what freedom do we have, right? What is the government's job to tell us what we can and cannot put in our bodies? That is not their job. Their job is to keep us safe from external threats and natural threats, and create communities and set up, common goods. But to regulate what we can and cannot put on our bodies, the war on drugs has been a disaster. I would want New York to take no part in that. Criminal justice reform. None of that's possible with a corrupt government. None of it. How are you going to do any of that with a corrupt government? Education reform. Let's get school out of the way of education. Now, school is great for a select few, right? It's totally inequitable, though. It's not working. There's a combination of the union serving teachers more than students, and we need to bring that into balance, right? It's not to say the union is overall bad and we need to get rid of it. It's just out of balance, right? And the government needs to realign those interests to make sure that the union is doing what it's meant to do without infringing on the students. Just the way the police union has operated at the expense of many communities, right? So similar balance. We need an uncorrupt government to really be able to put that infrastructure in place. I would decentralize the education budget. There's already plenty of money flowing, certainly not going to the students. If the average student pre-COVID, the New York City education budget was $34 billion, right? There are a million students, so it's $34K per student per year. And they're with a million students, or 34 kids in the class, each teacher should be getting about $1 million a year if all the money was going to the teachers. It quite obviously is not. So where is all that money going? We need to be able to create more choices. There shouldn't be down to one spot in the school, right? It shouldn't be, there's so few options that you only get this one seat. That's all that's left, right? Let's create the options, right? And let's fix the laws to do that in an equitable way, right? If there are concerns about the way that charters operate, we can sort of create those laws, but let's just create those guidelines, but let charters exist, right? If parents want to send their kids to charters, that's freedom, right? All we can do is make the public school as good as it can possibly be in case those parents want that option. That should be our concern. Creating good public schools rather than getting rid of charter schools. I think the best way to do that is give principals more control over their budget. I know there's at least one teacher on the stream, so I'll look for their ideas. Prioritizing tutoring and learning disabilities. We know that's a thing. That's what the science has told us. I went to reading boot camp in 2nd grade. I'm dyslexic, and I went to boot camp for like 2 or 3 months, and I was on track. I just needed time and a half on tests for the rest of my education, and I was good. There's no reason every student shouldn't have that, right? So tutoring, decentralizing that budget, allowing principals the funds to actually implement those ideas. And if they don't implement those ideas, there are enough options where parents can take their kids elsewhere. I think that's the best union of effective practices for public education, and letting the free market sort of bolster up the quality of education. Finally, I think teachers should be paid more, just generally. They're so critical. We want the most brilliant and exciting people in front of our students. So let's pay them. We want the best. Let's pay them. Let's just make it easier to fire the bad teachers. And there's no point in paying teachers 10 times as much if we have to keep the exact same teachers, right? If we don't have any control over who's in front of our students, that's a big problem. Mandatory union dues. Yeah, I would love to talk to teachers about it. please reach out, seidmanformayor@gmail.com. On Twitter, LinkedIn, not on Facebook because there's too much centralized power, not on Instagram. But yeah, I think there's teachers who will have an insight that I just couldn't have unless I was a teacher. And as a mayor, I can't be a firefighter and a cop and a teacher and a doctor and a engineer and a data scientist. I can't have all those jobs and then crowdsource all that. I shouldn't need to either. All of us already have those jobs. We just need someone who's going to bring us together and facilitate the discussion. And that's what I hope to do as mayor. Government's corrupt. Let's decentralize the power. Thank you, Austin, for your comment. And folks, I want to be mindful of the time. 10:16. Let's rip through a few of these, and I'll monitor the comments. Let's just take a quick break. You guys want to hear a joke? Maya Wiley's website. Oh, it's a little bit unmayoral of me to say, but it's brutally honest. And I think we need a little more of that in politics. I just put her website in the chat. Feel free to check it out. It's insulting how basic, unrefined, unanalytical the ideas are. She's treating us like children. And if you want to treat your citizens like that, then I don't think you should be mayor. Okay, but I think I should be mayor. Life in quarantine, no more shutdowns. The shutdowns don't work. If you're concerned about the spread, you should make sure your government isn't corrupt. So then the government can actually provide more testing, more vaccination, right? That's more information, more research. Let's present us with the latest and greatest, maybe new masks. Maybe our information should have been updated from a year ago, right? Best practices. That's what the government should be doing, not forcing us all to stay indoors, no indoor dining, you can't go out, this, that. All these shutdowns, they have unintended consequences. And we have to balance that against COVID. Shutdowns are not the way. There should be testing on every corner. I should be able to go downstairs and get a COVID test in the morning. That's how you beat COVID. Massive, massive testing. Make it so easy for everyone to get tested that we stop the spread before it even happens. It's not rocket science. It just requires a government that's not corrupt. Life beyond quarantine. Let's appoint a director of health to monitor for infectious diseases going forward. COVID won't be the last pandemic. Let's make sure there's the infrastructure in place for next time. Take the opportunity to fix the MTA. We might have even missed that, but if somebody had their thinking cap on, they would have used all these months where people aren't commuting as much to actually fix the subways. The problem is the government doesn't care about us. They don't respect us. They want to stay in power. They want to serve their donors. Because at the end of the day, people are largely selfish, right? If you give them the chance to act selfishly, they'll do so, right? People are good too, right? There's this yin yang in all of us. The issue with laws is we have to accommodate for the fact that people could be selfish, right? This whole idea of, oh, well, we'll just vote for good people. Like Eric Adams, I want to get a beer with him so he would never deceive us or he would never cheat us. That's how we've sort of been hedging against corruption. Let's just vote for good people. It's not working. Everyone's trying to just vote for good people, and it's not working. Okay? So let's realign that system so that it's just harder to be corrupt. And that's what referendums are to me. Finally, yeah, we should be getting free corona vaccines every year. There are going to be variants, just like with the flu. You got a flu shot. That's on the house. It's just better for all of us if vaccination is free. The whole idea of forcing people to get vaccinated is very suspect. Can't get on board with that. Even in schools, I think there should be schools that have exceptions and parents want to send their kids to schools that don't have this requirement. They know that going in, that's a contract they have. This whole idea of saying your kid must get vaccinated, this is very shaky ground. And the solution is not forcing people to do what we want them to do. It's making it as easy as possible for them to do what we want them to do. That's what freedom is, and that's what will actually work. Take a look at the chat. COVID hit people who had prior conditions the hardest. True. There is a bigger health crisis in the US than a pandemic. People need to work to increase their health. Sure. Yeah. The government can't solve every single problem, right? We can't rely on the government to do so either. All we can do is make sure the government is not providing perverse incentives and building as strong a floor as possible. Thank you, Donald. COVID is airborne and the city needs to talk about it as such. I agree. I wish you had political power to propose a solution that we could all vote on. You could be a leader, you could be a champion of this cause, and you wouldn't have to rely on some corrupt politician to get it done for you. Affordable housing, quick review. The government's corrupt, big intervention, everyone in the room. Let's be honest with ourselves. We got a problem, but it's not irredeemable. There's still hope. Let's fix the corrupt government. I'm proposing decentralizing the power. Everyone else is pretending like there's no problem. From there, we can fix all these problems, including, but not limited to, affordable housing reform. The rent, and this is for Jimmy McMillan, 2013. The rent is too damn high. It's insane. It's just run away with the train, right? We all know it. And the number one way to bring the rent down is more supply, right? Just because we're New York and we're cool and it's a great city does not mean we are exempt from supply and demand, right? We still need supply. So many people would move here if the rents went down anyway. So we just need to build and build and build until everyone has affordable housing, and then keep building so that we can bring as many people into the fold as possible. To me, that looks like just getting the government out of the way for a lot of it. You know, there should be local control over what gets built where. It's just way out of balance. It's centralized control with the zoning laws, and then it's additional local control. By the time anything gets built, it's only for the billionaires. It's not worth building for the middle class or the poor. Why would I bribe all these city officials if I can't even, you know, sell my penthouse for $100 million? We need to lower that barrier of entry and keep lowering it until the building happens. Cut real estate taxes, loosen zoning laws, just keep loosening them. Keep local control. I'm fine if communities want to have input, but that should be the extent of the government's intervention in that process. Let's clean out the horrible politicians who only care about their income increasing. Amen, brother. Amen. So yeah, make zoning laws optional and enforced at a local level. Building 21st century public housing. So here's what I was saying about food before. Food is still a relatively free market. You know, there are inspections and stuff like that. There's oversight, but that's just for basic safety, right? It's a pretty fair market. You could say that big agriculture has their hooks in us, and there are a lot of problems there. But you know, that's a separate discussion. I think compared to housing in New York, food is a relatively free market, and people are still hungry, right? That $10 to $15 you'd have to spend to buy food out, or maybe $5 to $10 of what it costs at the grocery store. That's still a lot for a lot of people, obviously, because so many people are still hungry. So there's going to be a certain subset of the population where free market housing just isn't cheap enough for. And for them, we need an expansion of public housing. And I don't know if NYCHA is the institution to do it. They've consistently failed in so many regards. Maybe if they made systemic changes so that we knew the money would be better spent, it wouldn't be corrupt, it wouldn't be mismanaged. They wouldn't leave their tenants living with vermin and in such unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Maybe it could be NYCHA. But I think the only group of people who can make that decision legitimately is us. Yeah, and the only exception to, helping the mentally ill, I think it's possible that should be an exception. They should get free housing. That should be a guaranteed service, and maybe not. But I think there is a reasonable expectation that they need extra support, and this could be one of them. If every single mentally ill person on the Eastern Seaboard moves to New York, we may not be able to accommodate all that. So it'll have to be done in a sustainable way. Maybe it'll take time, but maybe it can be part of the solution. For president, well, hey, look, I like to start local. That's why I'm running for mayor. I don't want to get ahead of myself. But I appreciate the morale. Incentivize public transportation. Cleaning up the subways, more buses. Amen. Gun reform. It's 10:25. Let's do a quick review of the competition. Let's knock this out. Ray McGuire. Beautiful man. So charming and well-spoken, handsome, and he comes from private industry, Wall Street. He's just, he's a smart guy. Harvard and Princeton and wherever, it's just like the list goes on why he should be mayor. The issue is his ideas are horrible. His game theory is so weak. I just sent you a link to his policy. If you click on economy and jobs, his number one, his flagship issue, it's got to be good, right? Get 50,000 New Yorkers back to work with the Comeback Job Accelerator. We'll bring back 50,000 jobs by covering 50% of a worker's salary for 1 year at small businesses that were hardest hit by the pandemic. Whoa! Whoa! The number one thing he does is come out with the heavy-handed government. Heavy hands. The government is going to bring back these 50,000 jobs? By guaranteeing the workers' salaries? What is that nonsense? This was supposed to be the beautiful Harvard man who's been in Wall Street. Why is he proposing these ideas? Why doesn't he get the corrupt government out of the way? That might be a good start. Keep going down. He's got all sorts of ideas here that are very disappointing. Small businesses to keep their sales tax receipts for 1 year and use those funds to bring back employees or pay utilities. Allow city permits and licenses to renew for the next 12 months without any fees. Why don't you just get rid of the licensing? Why does my barber need a license, right? The license is if the haircut is good. If the haircut is no good, nobody's going back to that barber, right? We don't need to regulate every corner of the market. That's exactly what we shouldn't be doing. So Ray, you lost my vote. You didn't say the government was corrupt. You came out with bad ideas. Very disappointing. I gotta say. Folks, we're moving, but we gotta keep pushing. Gun reform. It's baked into our DNA as a country, right? The right to bear arms. Anyone who's gonna come out against that fully is just in the wrong country, the wrong time. There's no context there. Especially with a corrupt government. We need some sort of hedge against them turning on us, right? There needs to be some sort of option in the worst case scenario. Although that hasn't happened in debatably forever, it's a possibility. So why would we tie one hand behind our back to a corrupt government? So we have to keep that in mind. At the same time, we have an epidemic of gun violence. These numbers are higher than any other country. It has to be addressed. So make sure every gun sold in New York has a background check and periodic mental health screenings. I think that's reasonable enough. We're not taking away any guns. We're just making sure the ones that are being sold to people who are fit to use them. As those weapons get closer to military grade, those licensing checks and those mental health screenings should be progressively stricter, right? Maybe we can ban nuclear bombs, right? I think that's fair. But arms, even assault weapons for ex-military folks who get mental health screenings every 6 months and are keeping up to date with their training and everything is above water, maybe that shouldn't be banned in New York. Maybe there should just be stricter controls to make sure that those more dangerous weapons are being used appropriately. It's a balance. Everything's a balance across time and space. Maybe different boroughs will have different ideas on this, and maybe over time will change. But we have to keep an open mind. Banning the stuff we don't want to see often has unintended consequences. We need to think about the long game. We need to create laws that are based in nature. 3-day latency between sales and receiving a weapon. Maybe it should be 2 days, maybe it should be a week. Let's see what 60% of New Yorkers think. I'm going to take another Marco Rubio sip. You guys still with me? All right. This is Catherine Garcia's website. Catherine. All right. Nice. A question about all these plans and ideas. Theoretically, they will have to go through approval via direct democracy. Yep. I wouldn't sign anything without the approval of 60% of New Yorkers. And it also has to go through City Hall, right? So I can only decentralize as much power as I have. And that's a natural balancing point between direct democracy and representation. And that's sort of how we hedge against tyranny of the masses and tyranny of the minority. All right, people are still here. James Madison allowed a private company to own artillery, naval cannons to defend their products, as you should have. Folks, this is Catherine Garcia. Beautiful woman, New York native. She's running for mayor. The issue is she was the commissioner of sanitation, and there is garbage on every corner. So that's the first problem. Second problem is she was also the interim director of NYCHA, which is one of the most destroyed programs in the city, right? So she's off to a rough start, and this is her housing policy. She's saying, if you scroll down, Catherine will address street homelessness with urgency and compassion. That's great. Everyone wants everyone with compassion. I want my nurse and my piano teacher and my grocer to have compassion, but we need good ideas, right? We can't just have compassion. We spend $3 billion annually on shelters, housing first. That sounds great. If you scroll through these ideas, there are a lot of them, by the way. It's tough to even keep track. You see this term deeply affordable housing repeatedly. And this sort of lingo, this is classic politician promising this and that. I don't see how. How are we going to do this? Tell me how. I'm sick of being told these are the outcomes you'll get if you vote for me, but you haven't presented me with your plan. And you haven't even said the government's corrupt. In fact, you've been complicit in the corrupt government for years now. So I can't vote for her for mayor. Tax reform. Oh, what a doozy. What a haven for the rich. They're making out like bandits, right? Loopholes as far as you can see. We have to send in that return just to get our money back. And we need Credit Karma, TurboTax, all these corrupt corporations that are bribing the politicians to keep the tax code complicated, high barrier of entry. Nobody knows what's going on. And by the time it's all said and done, the rich got richer. So we need to fix that. All of this money, all of these earnings need to be treated as one pool. Your income, your capital gains, your this investment, that offshore, in the Caymans, Ireland, Delaware. All this needs to be streamlined into one, just treated as earnings, right? $1 earned should be $1 taxed. And in New York City, we have 4 brackets going up to 90K. Everything above 90K is taxed at the same rate. That doesn't make sense, right? Especially if we're running a deficit because of COVID. We just got all the stimulus from the federal government, but who knows where that will go? Probably get squandered, and before long, we're back in the same boat. We need to move away from income tax towards consumption taxes, more like the carbon tax. There's no reason to be, we didn't even have an income tax until about 100 years ago. So it's definitely possible to run a government without income tax. Let's move away from that. What income tax we stick with, we should have more brackets. They don't have to be overtly, penalizing the millionaires and the billionaires, but there should be something on top of the 90K. Why is it that we have 4 brackets in the first 90K? Why don't we just have a flat tax at that point? If everyone above 90K is paying the same thing anyway. Move towards consumption taxes, and let's review the expenditures. Let's see where this money is going. I wouldn't raise taxes a nickel until I knew where the money was going. That's tax reform, folks. All right, we're a little off topic. That's fine. Be that as it may. Folks, before we wrap this baby up, I'm going to send you Diane Morales' website. Diane is a crusader for justice, very strong voice. We need her in the city. She's invaluable, and we need her fight for justice, right? What is unfortunate is her game theory. If you click on her link and you scroll down to an intersectional agenda, you will see her plans for guaranteed housing for all, integrate our schools, build equity, defund the police, fund the people, protect our immigrant neighbors, gender and sexual equity, strengthening workers' rights, democratizing health and care, public infrastructure investment, green jobs, green food, green justice, small business and cooperative economy, people-centered tech, wealth tax-free CUNY, public banking, land and development accountability, and a partridge in a pear tree, all without any mention of a corrupt government. If you vote for her, she's the only candidate who can use the corrupt government to get that done. That's what she's telling you. Leave that be. Tax reform, folks, were in other. Seidman for mayor. I'm running long, but this I'm having a blast. I don't know about you guys. 1036 in the East. We're in other. Now, this is basically the catch-all. For everything they told me not to mention, if you're running for politics, it's everything you don't bring up voluntarily. That's what's here, right? Starting with abortion. So abortion has become a heavily politicized issue because people are just coming at it from complete opposite sides, and we've lost our ability to even recognize each other's autonomy and different perspectives and build a society that is as free as possible. Right. So for me personally, I think we should define the beginning of life where we define the end of life, which is with heartbeat and neurological activity. And that happens somewhere between 20 and 28 weeks. I understand some people think it should begin at conception. And I think that sort of disagreement could only be resolved by what 60% of constituents believe. This whole idea that this is going to be solved at the federal level for a transcontinental country with 50 states that has 230 years of diverging laws and culture. It's not going to work. There's certain issues we'll never all be able to agree on. We need to build a union, a city, a state, and a government that can bend without breaking. That's what direct democracy is. That sort of balancing point between what can and cannot be broken is determined by those referendums, by the people, not some corrupt politician. Free immigration between states and countries. We have all these licensing laws that say if you want to be a doctor, that's fine, but you have to get licensed in 50 states to do so. So most people just stay in the state where they originally got licensed. Some states are very kind, and they have interstate sort of agreements. So if you're in Wisconsin, you get that license. You can also practice in Minnesota. It's very generous. But if you want to move to any of the other 48 states, you're going to have to get relicensed. That is not freedom. That is not efficiency. That's not the free market. Need to get rid of that. And we should be promoting immigration jobs. And we can't let illegal immigrants take jobs from Americans. But we also have to balance that against our need to grow, our need to be a part of these solutions where there's genocide and issues abroad. We can't turn our backs on that. That's a balance that 60% of Americans should be agreeing on. It can only happen with a government that's not corrupt. No more baking garbage on the streets. I think we can all get behind that. It's disgusting. Catherine Garcia was largely complicit in that, so that's not ideal. If we want to make her mayor, we can expect more of it. 21st century infrastructure, I think it's time. I wouldn't want all this money being spent by a corrupt government, but the roads, the bridges, getting around town is a nightmare. I'm hitting red lights every block or two on my bike, in my car. These city lights, even if they were timed at random, they couldn't be this bad, right? I think they're designed to actually slow us down. Maybe that's just me and my uneasiness with the corrupt government, but yeah, isn't it literally the opposite? Complicit, well, she's complicit in the sense that she has not spoken out against the corrupt government. She's taken part in it, and she actually gives herself credit for it. But the government's corrupt. And if we're going to fix that, we have to save those words first, and she's failed to do so. How would you make sure to invest in climate change? That's the carbon tax. So right up top, on my website, under the earth. It's the #1 way to stop climate change is punish, disincentivize the activity you don't want to see, and then use that money to fix the problem. You don't need 35 bullet points for that. No more wars. I don't know when we're going to leave these wars. I don't know what the plan for that is, but it's gone on too long. The government is obviously serving a certain set of interests, which are not ours. A balanced budget. I don't know how many years in a row we can just keep going. Is this a sustainable model to just spend more than we have and keep printing and printing and printing? There was a question about inflation. You know, maybe a small deficit isn't horrible in the case of a pandemic. But that's a decision that we should all be involved in. Let's all define that point together of what an acceptable amount of printing inflation is. There are people who feel very strongly about this, and if we don't bring those voices into the discussion, they're just going to take their wealth elsewhere. So, is that a risk we want to take? A free market economy that works for everyone. I think we've talked about that. Finally, folks, we did it. Leaders who love their neighbors. This is actually the #1 solution to our problems. And I spend the whole time talking about the corrupt government because I'm running for office, not running for, preacher or community leader, something like that. But our leaders need to be espousing this. Loving your neighbor and being cooperative, leaning into community, showing up, right? Giving people the benefit of the doubt. That sort of activity is what's going to fix all the problems the government can't fix. There's certain problems the government cannot fix. Certainly not overnight. Maybe in the long run, if the right laws are passed, we can move in the right direction, but there's certain problems that we just need community for. And we need our politicians to stop dividing us. This divide and conquer isn't working. I mean, it's keeping them in power, but it has so many unintended consequences. We're so divided right now. Our leaders should be bringing us together. They should be promoting love your neighbor rather than if you vote for the other guy, it's all going to go to hell. To a certain extent, it will go to hell if you vote for the wrong people. But if that is the only message, we don't have folks coming out for love your neighbor, cooperation, we're going to have problems. So this is the #1 solution. I put it at the end because, if you run for mayor and your whole idea is kumbaya, love your neighbor, people don't really take you seriously. But in the context of changing all these laws to actually fix our society, fix the system, fix our government, build a community and a city based on happiness, I think this is very in line with all of those ideas. They're definitely not mutually exclusive. And it's like the yin to the yang. Decentralize the power, love your neighbor. It's going to be okay. Folks, we're here. I'll take a couple questions. War is how we put them. Okay. That's a hot take, and I respect your freedom of speech. If you're on my website, I'll take a couple more questions. But just a few other very important things I want to point out. I think I'm extremely different from every other candidate. I campaign in a different park around the city every week. You can come see me live. That calendar's on my website. I call it the Speaker's Corner. So feel free to come on out. I don't accept campaign donations. The only money that I kind of took is from my campaign manager who bought me 2 chairs. That was $20, so thank you, sir. And my treasurer actually bailed me out because I had an overdraw fee of $5. So I took $5 from my treasurer. Thank you to both of you. So that's $25. I only spent $376. It's all there. You can see what I spent it on. Not advertising, not blowing up your phone. Hope you appreciate that. Definitely join my mailing list. It's just once a week. Nice little update. Quick and dirty. Remind you about decentralizing power, and then you can get back to your life. I have 5 position papers that are live. 1 more coming out on Monday. I don't know how much the other candidates are writing. I haven't seen much. Certainly haven't seen anything about decentralizing power. If you want to host an analysis, please do. I'm always down to Zoom, or we can do it live in whatever context makes sense. And all that's left to say is I love you, New York. City I grew up in, city I love. And I can't wait to see it be the best that it can be. Do you have cards yet? Business cards? I have business cards. I got good business cards, actually. What do you think about replacing curbside parking with cafes, restaurants, wider sidewalks, etc.? Yeah, I like that. I think we have like a limited amount of space, and we're all squabbling over it. We want to eat on the street. We want the bike lanes. We want the cars parking. We want extra wide sidewalks. We want extra wide roads. We're sort of just fighting over the same space. And what we need to do is build up, right? We need to build up for housing. We need to build up for infrastructure. I'm imagining double-decker roads on a lot of these busy streets to put the bikes and the pedestrians up top. We can put some cafes up top too. We can sort of do that on a block-by-block level. But there needs to be a commitment to actually fixing getting around town, fixing the infrastructure, fixing the potholes. It starts with making the government less corrupt. Make it institutionally respect the will of the people more. I think we should be building more garages. That could free up a lot of parking. I think that'll free up space for cafes, free up space for whatever we want. So we can get very creative. We should be burying highways, putting parks on top of them, reconnecting communities. There's a lot we can do here. It all starts with decentralizing the power. Thank you, Austin. Thank you, Matt. Yep, I'll get you some business cards. Folks, that's all she wrote. I got to save something for next time. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I'm not going to ask you to like, share, and subscribe because that's not my style, but I definitely will mention it. I think, you know, just your time here tonight has been invaluable, and I hope it sort of triggers some sort of thoughts about how we can make the government less corrupt, how we can fix these issues that can no longer go on. You know, how many more Black men have to be killed in the street before we actually take action? How many more homes have to go underwater? How many storms have to hit us? How many people have to die prematurely from preventable medical conditions? It's time. Can we get a verse, chorus, bridge next time? Thank you so much, one and all. I love you all so much. I welcome any and all thoughts. And yeah, keep decentralizing the power, speaking out against corruption in whatever way you can and think is productive. And I'll see you at the next one.